Hello and welcome to the Bald Ambition Podcast. I am your host, Mookie Spitz. Very bald, very ambitious, and my topic today is creative writing in the age of artificial intelligence. I have just published my second novel, a science fiction novel, first in a series, and I take tremendous pride in the quality of the work, its originality, and the lived experiences that have engendered both. I'm not going to go into the novel itself on this pod. I've got several other sessions that I've devoted to speaking about the book, the philosophy behind it, my process, how I'm promoting it. This pod, I'm exclusively focused on two things: writing it within the midst of this large language model revolution that we're all immersed in, and doing so in a manner where I believe I got all the benefit without the downside. And I think this second focus is significant because I've been reading and hearing about a lot of nonsense associated with these LLMs, their relationship to the creative process, and these dire predictions about the end of writing and writers and the imminent doom of creativity itself. So let me start with my own N of one first person sharing of how I used the LLM to enhance my own creative writing. And I believe enhance is a good word. Ernest Hemingway once said that if you want to know if your story is any good, take out all the best lines. And by that he meant a story is a good story if the essence of it is captivating, emotionally resonant, believable, and follows the usual and archetypal and ancient rules of storytelling. You have a hero who has goals, and there are obstacles, and the hero overcomes obstacles to get closer or even attain their goal. Full stop. When you're talking about creative writing, and that's what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about technical writing. I'm not talking about marketing writing, although a lot of marketing writing follows this archetype, this dramatic kind of flow. A lot of marketing writing uses the techniques of storytelling ostensibly to create that kind of emotional resonance, to draw out a reaction and engender some kind of behavioral change. But for the sake of this discussion, I am talking exclusively about creative writing. And what Hemingway meant is a good story is a good story. And it's been told a million times before in a million different forms, but it hits home. It follows a few basic rules, and it does it for the reader. Now, on top of that story, that dramatic arc, that emotionally resonant content, you can do what he implicitly suggests. You could add some good lines. You can embellish it. You could razz it up with your riz. But end of that author's day, he used to get up early in the morning and get all of his writing done pretty much before 11 a.m., I think, when his mind was active, even if he was hungover. And Ernest, by the way, is not in my list of favorite writers. I could devote another podcast to that and to why. But he's got some great quotes, and this one is one of them. And I'm quoting him here because I think it's very, very applicable to the confusion and also the opportunity of this AI revolution through the lens of creative writing. In essence, my thesis here is that the LLMs, these transformer models, ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, DeepSeek, what have you, whether a frontier model or a new one, a specialized one within a particular vertical or industry or even business or a generalized application, these transformers give you some good lines. They'll embellish and help you enhance what you already put into your work to doll it up a little bit and dial it up a little bit. And at their best, by adding a few good lines, and by lines I might even mean some thoughts and some opportunities for exploration, they're doing exactly that. You use them and you query them, you prompt them, and they aggregate data in such an intuitive and accessible way that they not only save you time, but reveal aspects of your own thinking through the lens of petabytes of content that they've sliced and diced, tokened up, and through matrix math, probabilistically associated with other tokens and pieces of content that hundreds, thousands, millions of writers and readers have processed before you. It's an amazing tool if used well. It can be a distraction, but this notion that the models, these transformers, are doing our job is erroneous. And it's a useful deception for people who like to complain, who are naysayers and doomsayers. But good writing is good writing, and the origin of good writing is the lived experience of the writer following a few basic, essential, proven rules and going for it. No pain, no gain, no risk, no reward. Writing is hard. It's like laying pipe, I believe another writer described it as. It's really, really hard work, but it's joyful work. And you can instantly tell as an educated, empathetic reader when that writing comes through this crucible of human experience and writing experience to deliver a compelling story at its essence, which is not, repeat, not driven by ideas. Great creative writing, great literature, regardless of the genre, horror, romance, science fiction, great writing from a great writer is not the conveyance of interesting ideas. Great creative writing, what we would consider literature, literary content, is focused on the human experience. You have characters who are in situations where, based on the imagination and lived experience of the writer, take on lives of their own. They enter a narrative, often without much background, because a backstory is unnecessary for the drama to unfold. Characters in a story enter that story in a manner where the reader, the audience, can relate to them as people, can empathize with both their desires and the obstacles that they face to realize those desires. That is creative writing. That is literature. Anything short of that is a cognitive exercise in either world creation or vanity. A writer demonstrating to a reader how much they know or how smart they are, how air quote creative they are. None of that really matters. What matters, back to Hemingway's point, is a story devoid of the good lines. And by good lines, he meant all these embellishments that I'm referring to. Now, my genre of choice, for many, many reasons, was science fiction. And science fiction suffers from this delusion of ideation over character and concepting over lived experience and world building over whimsy. More so, I think, than any other genre, because there are elements of geekery that are foundational to even a series like Asimov's Foundation. People read science fiction because they like that kind of thing. And it's fueled by this desire to be placed in some kind of alternative reality that is different enough from our own to be captivating, yet is air quote futuristic enough to beguile and entice. And usually the charm is found not in the heart, but in the head. And that, I think, is a problem with the genre. And it's also a problem with a lot of writing, which dedicates itself to maps versus territory. Because the territory that you indulge in as a writer is that of the human soul and not our cerebrum firing cognitively with all of these interesting concepts. Good writing is a melding of the two, of course. Pure poetry, pure emotive ranting or whining or weeping or lamenting or even celebrating, is equally vapid. Like the yin yang symbol of the East, great literature and great art, for that matter, is a wonderful equilibrium which is attained between head and heart. The heart is the engine, is the foundation around which the story moves. It's the fuel of the story. It's ubiquitous. The head is also required to give it structure and to act, if nothing else, as counterpoint to the raw emotion. The mind is a reminder that the heart can't get what it wants. So when the hero, the protagonist, the characters in a story are thrust into a situation, their motivation is always emotional. They might have a concrete goal, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, the emergence equations that can control reality itself. Doesn't matter. The motivation is emotional. You can say that it's based on power, but it obviously goes deeper than that. There's some personal essence, an itch that needs to be scratched. And as the characters scratch these deep rooted emotional itches, the role of the mind and the role of the concepts and sophisticated setups and elaborate descriptions, the good lines that Hemingway was referring to, come largely from the mind and do so as a way, optimally and internally, of helping the characters scratch that emotional itch. This is often the opposite of how many writers approach creative writing, how many readers approach their consumption of it, and leads to the erroneous notion that the large language models are the end of literature. The large language models aren't the end of literature, and I'm going to posit that they might be the opposite, because they help us worry less about the good lines and, in an optimal sense, assist the writer and the reader to focus even more prominently and precisely on the story and the emotion and the heart and the characters that are at the essence of a great piece of literature. Now, that all said, my approach to writing this novel began and ended with the characters. And I learned this the hard way. For years and years and years, I struggled with the good lines getting in the way of a good story. I felt that I had to prove myself to be an air quote good writer. I had to, in a sense, emulate the prodigious gifts, usually cognitive, of my idols. Specifically, I must have been 21, maybe 22, when I read Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, the 1973 sprawling novel that ended up winning the National Book Award and almost won the Pulitzer, but was shot down because it was kind of vulgar. It was too vulgar to win the Pulitzer. My, how times have changed. Anyway, Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow was like a needle in my vein shooting the goodies into my cardiovascular system and right into my cerebral cortex. The writing was dense, layered, gorgeous. The references, the manic shift from politics to history, from science to spirituality, the blending, the motion, the flow, the manic, frenzied intensity blew my mind. The only analogous experience that I had up to that point with any kind of art form was, as trite as it sounds like, seeing Star Wars on the big screen when I was 12, 13 years old. 1977, May. The lines were long, but I finally got in. When I left the theater, I walked into the blazing sunlight of the Chicago summer and I closed my eyes and I saw the spaceships flying as reflections on my inner eyelids. That's how much that movie impacted me. Wow! It seems almost trite now, but it did it for me. And Pynchon did it for me. And then I became addicted to the encyclopedic novel, leading all the way up to David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, whom I saw give a reading. And there was the stopgap. Then I realized that a paragraph that can go on for 5, 6, 7 continuous pages might not be moving me emotionally to the point where I would want to emulate that kind of style, let alone indulge it. Something was happening with me, and it was twofold. The first, I didn't heed the warning that you should not try to emulate the artists that you fall in love with. It's probably worse than getting to know them or dating them. Gore Vidal once famously said in his Palimpsest, an excellent, excellent autobiography, quirky, but great and insightful, that he hated to meet the writers of books he adored because he was always disappointed. They were always human, all too human. And then when he went back to the works that he adored, he couldn't even finish them, or he had to look at these masterpieces differently because the writer was such a slob or a boor or just a piece of shit. And what that means to me isn't that I should shun writers whom I don't even know or meet. But what that exemplifies is this love affair with talented people whose skill sets, whose lived experiences are very, very, very different from my own. And I learned that lesson too late. I did the same thing with electric guitar playing. I adored the playing of Yngwie Malmsteen, the Swedish neoclassical shredder, who learned by ear how to play Vivaldi and Paganini on a Fender Stratocaster. The guy was great, and I spent years playing scalloped Fender Stratocasters doing arpeggios at 90 miles an hour. And what I lost during those years of playing the electric guitar was the opportunity to, you see what's coming, write a damn good song. I go full circle to this notion that creative writing, just like creativity in any other art form or modality, is contingent on the writer, on the performer, on the songwriter connecting to the audience through their lived experience emotionally. I'm not downplaying Ingwe's skill, virtuosity, and the transformative contribution that he's made to music. The guy is, as they say, hashtag GOAT, the greatest of all time. But what I'm illustrating is the danger of infatuation translating into emulation. Ingwe has 37 trillion cells in his body, more or less, and so do I, but they're not the same 37,000 billion cells arranged accordingly. I'm my own person with my own innate predilection. I have my own lived experience in the way that I prioritize energy and enthusiasm and point of view and execution. The danger in falling in love with the artists whom you adore is that you can't help but emulate characteristics of their genius that you yourself do not possess. And this becomes a dead end for artists. And it's horrific because you are pursuing skills and attitudes and forms of expression that are not natural and innate and unique to you. You are copying someone else's style. And the opportunity costs of this is significant because unless you're, let's say, like a Paul Gilbert, who has unbelievable skills just in terms of mastering the electric guitar and its fretboard, Paul Gilbert, by way of analogy, can play in the style of Ingwe, Eddie Van Halen, Alan Holdsworth, you name it. The guy is a machine. So much so, and this is the essence of my point, that Paul Gilbert himself has admitted that he himself has no unique style. He loves the guitar so much, and he loves his fellow geniuses so much that he is an engine of style, emulation, and elaboration. I'm not a Paul Gilbert of literature. I love Jean Genet, but I don't see the world as he does. I love William Gibson, and he's of another time and another place. And I adored Thomas Pynchon, but I am not Thomas Pynchon. He's an isolated recluse, and I cannot shut the hell up. So, what I learned throughout all of these years of failed emulation and struggle and personal disappointment is that I had to learn how to trust my lived experience, and I needed to give myself a break. I needed to consider myself smart and talented and dedicated enough, if given the chance, if I only gave myself the chance, to master my own way of doing it. And that took a combination of building confidence through my lived experience, overcoming my own childhood traumas and difficult family, and maneuvering my way through the labyrinth of adulthood from the vantage point of a kid who never wanted to grow up. And the output of this took time. And I'm a relative late bloomer to make the statement that I love my own shit. I love my style. And I don't want to go into the details of the novel, but the way it's written and presented, and my whole approach to writing this book is very, very, very Mookie Spitz. And that took two things. It took time, and it took, like Jimi Hendrix loved to say, "Are you experienced?" in the opening song of his debut solo record, guitars playing backwards. I always felt those guitars playing backwards signified the rationale for Jimmy being experienced. Thousands and thousands of hours playing guitar. He was taking you back through his life, justifying his statement, celebrating it. Jimmy was indeed experienced, and he was inviting you to that psychedelic party. My invitation to you, to my stuff, through my novel, is similarly thousands and thousands of hours writing. I've captured some of it on Medium, everything from political op-eds to screenplays, plays, novella. And while I was writing, going back to 2018 on the Medium platform there, I started to become obsessed with this OCD like symmetry. I started writing in block paragraphs. 3 lines, 4 lines, 5 lines. Medium has a serifed default font. So the number of letters and words in each paragraph were still ad hoc, arbitrary, but within a range. And I set these artificial boundaries on myself because I was frustrated as a writer in terms of just writing gonzo, like an artist with an endless, limitless palette. Where do you stop? Where do you start? The arbitrariness of prose always bothered me. When I was in college, I had an Apple IIe computer and I programmed in Pascal, that programming language. And I loved the symmetry of it and the self delineated operators. You didn't code anything wasteful if you were any good at it. You had routines, triggering subroutines. It all looked pretty. It was beautiful and it was succinct. It got the job done. Prose, in contrast, is so ad hoc and arbitrary, it just flows. And I have this predilection, in case you haven't been able to tell yet, that I go on and on. I go on these podcasts, and I love it. And I go on and on when I write. I do think that I speak well and I write well, but when you're putting together a narrative, a story, once again, the arbitrariness of its beginning, middle, and end bothered me. And a philosophy student for a few years and a prolific reader in all things philosophical, the idea of the a priori always fascinated me. That which is before experience, foundation of thought and thinking, maybe even creativity. Is there such a thing as a perfect story? Is there the right way and a wrong way to do things, especially when it's so subjective? Anyway, all this has been swirling around for decades, and then I'm writing all these blogs and stories on Medium over the last 6, 7 years or so. And I became obsessed with solving this problem by writing in blocks, 3, 4, 5 lines long. The short story Greg's Gift is the crowning jewel of it and my voice. It's a Romana Clay style autobiographical piece going back to the 90s. It's fast, it's furious, it's fun, and it's obsessively written in this block style with sections that are equally obsessively numbered. I believe there's 12 sections with 12 paragraphs, and each paragraph had zealously 5 lines in each. The reason I bring this up is it created my own kind of cadence, my own kind of style. It forced me into thinking up new narrative ideas and character studies, and simply to make it match, to force those lines, to force those sections, to make it all fit together, became gamified. I was playing a game with the words, and it just became so much fun, and it became my signature style. So, long story, even longer, about my time, my experience, my evolution as a writer, especially later in life, especially over the course of the last 6 years. I've been writing in that style almost obsessively. So, most of the posts that you would see on Medium that I made public are in this OCD style. The new novel that I've written is in that style too. Every single paragraph is between about 175 and 195 characters, 27 to 33, 35 words, about 1-inch margins, Times Roman font, 3-line paragraphs, the whole book. Looks like lyric poetry, except for the lines of dialogue. I managed to match up the top and bottom margins, so for the most part, the left and right hand pages are aligned in their 3-line paragraphs. So you feel like you're reading The Odyssey more than Mookie's science fiction book. Okay, so I'm happily writing away my 3-line paragraphs. Then the question became, in this era of AI, how does a creative writer best capitalize on the tools at their disposal? The origin of the novel is a short story, also on Medium, that I wrote back in January 2021. We were stewing in the pandemic. The idea came to me. I wrote the short story. I knew I had something. And for about a year after that, I wrote the second part of the short story, which will become the second book in my series here, my science fiction series. And I loved it. And then I got distracted with another writing project and life, the universe, and everything, until managing just this year to finish that first book. And I finished that first book after a couple, 3 years of evolution of the large language models. So when ChatGPT first came out, it pulled from an older database of having scraped the web about a year and a half behind the actual queries. So if you are in early 2023 using the early version of ChatGPT, it's pulling from old data. It wasn't live data from the web, which is what, of course, it does now. And as we know, ChatGPT has come a long way, along with the other frontier LLMs, the new ones like DeepSeek, several others. These models have evolved so that they are tapping into real-time data online. They're searching the web and then aggregating that content through its transformer technology. And they are fun as hell to use. Now, there's been so much written and so much talked about how these models are the death of creative writing. I'll focus just on writing now because obviously there's extensibility into images. Graphic artists are freaking out. Video with Sora and other programs. Music. There's not a single human endeavor, especially creative endeavor, that won't be utterly transformed if it's not already been transformed by AI. I'm just going to focus on creative writing. And the death knell of creative writing has been foretold, really going back to the dawn of the OpenAI model. And I keep seeing these articles and I see the talking heads and they're going on and on and on how it's really a zero sum game and the situation's rather binary that you tell your own story and you're your own writer or you let the bots take over. And I'm not seeing much about how creative writers can use these tools analogously to how we use Google, just plain old search, being pointed to websites for us to browse and look and research and pull information from. And how about the old card catalog in those physical libraries where we would spend an afternoon looking up a few simple facts? You go to the card catalog, you find a book, you go to the shelves, the labyrinth of the library, rows and rows of books, columns of books. Sometimes you'd have to climb on a ladder, you pull the book down, you flip through the book, you look for what you're looking for, you take manual notes. Seems so archaic now. What digital did and then what search did was accelerate that process so you could be taken directly to the book, directly to the website. Then you do your hunting. The difference with the LLMs, as far as I'm concerned, is that it expedited the subsequent digital process of search. So instead of just being taken to a website, it digs in that website for you, as it were, and answers your question directly. And now it even has citations. So suffice to say, writing my novel was wonderful for me in terms of how ChatGPT became my buddy, my friend. If I wanted to hunt for a synonym of a word, I would just type the word and type synonym and it would pop it up. If I wanted a Gen Z variant of this word, all I had to do was ask for it. The technology is wonderful in terms of remembering what I had queried before, so it got to know me to the point where I would just type a word and it would give me a synonym, and then it would ask me if I wanted a Gen Z version of it. It didn't write my book, it helped me look stuff up. There are various explorations that I do in the book, everything from quantum mechanics, quantum teleportation, Boltzmann brains, cosmology, physics, particle physics, communications technology, history. I had ChatGPT at my side, not to write my book, but as a storehouse of human knowledge and information that I would readily access. And the responses I got were commensurate with the intelligence that I put into it regarding the queries that I made. So, for example, if you put in a prompt into ChatGPT, which I did, what's the relationship between the predicted mass of the Higgs boson and the results of the mass of the top quark? Now, I'm a science geek, and you don't have to know anything about what I just said, but the background of what I just asked is the essence of what physicists call the hierarchy problem. That there are huge energy gaps between the different layers, if you will, of complexity in the universe as we observe it, especially when it comes to the quantum or super sub microscopic level of reality. Now, I'm geeking out, but what I'm doing is I'm illustrating that I use GPT with my own knowledge of the subject. And what I discovered really was assuring in ways. First off, that it confirmed that I'm not nuts, that when I do weird queries like that, it responded in kind and intelligently and provided the answers that I was looking for. The other assurance I got was we are inundated by fake news and conspiracy theories and the general idea that absolute truth no longer exists. And what the bots are showing me is that, again, based on your queries, based on what you're looking for, the foundation of human knowledge is deep, authoritative, consistent, and very, very thought out, rational, and fascinating. And this applies really to all subjects. The more informed you are, and the more intelligent and penetrating your queries or your prompts, the more useful these things are in terms of diving even deeper. And there were several instances where I got an erroneous answer. I knew that the machine, that the transformer technology had cooked up a response that just wasn't right. And I would call the bot out. I would state that no, that's not the correct answer, and I would give it the reason the answer was wrong. And within a tenth of a second, it would talk back to me. It would acknowledge that it had made the mistake, cite different sources, and amalgamate the information accordingly, and then elaborate on it. Now, there's no sentience behind the machine. The IQ of the most sophisticated transformer model on the planet, and again, I'm not privy to this information now, but I would venture to assume that your house cat is far more intelligent than these machines because on the probabilities, the associated probabilities of the information that's contained within it. So, what's the probability that two words, two phrases are associated with each other? And then it tabulates the result. And then, based on what are called weights, it'll create a response for you. And who knew that this could work? Obviously, it's more complex than that. But in principle, that's pretty much it. They sliced and diced all the available information into what they call tokens. And then each token is related to other tokens in ways that really boil down to probabilities, much like the particles in the universe have probabilistic relationships to each other, which is fascinating in and of itself. It's like an analogy for quantum mechanics. But anyway, all that's going on, there's no man behind the curtain or woman or non-binary person. There's no little elf back there. Contrary to that Google programmer who I think lost his mind thinking that his bot was sentient, there's no ghost in the machine, at least not yet. But all this is incredibly useful, and it's useful for a creative writer. So going back to what I was saying, how can you use these bots intelligently and usefully? Not to write your stuff. I ranted for the first half hour in this podcast on the true nature of lived experience and the essence of a good story. And for the good lines, ChatGPT and their kind are superb. You've got your characters. The characters are talking to each other, they're fighting with each other. The story is evolving organically as the characters you created are interacting with each other to accomplish their goals and overcome their obstacles. And along the way, shit happens. And when that shit happens, it's fun to put some window dressing on it. And it's fun to explore some of the implications of the shit happening. And there's no better tool for us now, these days, than the large language models for a creative writer. You don't need to use them at all. Or you could keep it as a friend so that as you're writing and you think of an idea, you ask it a question, and then it'll provide a response based on way more queries and way more websites and way more content that you can possibly as a human being check out for yourself. And it learns about you and you learn about it, and then you discover better and better prompts to ask it based on your shared knowledge, as it were, of the world and of the subjects that you're investigating, elaborating on, and seeking to describe. So, in a nutshell, these large language models, AI for creative writing, is as useful, these tools are as useful as the intelligence and wherewithal and flexibility of the writer using them. And it's so much fun. Just as I have these 3-line paragraphs as I'm zooming through this novel, and I've gamified my prose, I have, in a sense, gamified the research that went into providing some of the good lines and the window dressing on a lot of what I was looking at. There's a dream sequence when the protagonist is captain of what could be considered an Alcubierre warp drive spaceship. It's this hypothetical kind of starship where it can travel, in a sense, and travel in air quotes, faster than the speed of light because it warps the space-time continuum in front of it and behind it to literally reposition the craft in a different part of the universe. So I had read about this technology and I was fascinated about it. I had already read the Wikipedia article. There were various articles in various science publications, some bullshit, some better than others, talking about this idea and this technology through different contexts too. And when I'm writing the book, I'm thinking, what would be the most advanced kind of starship for a very, very powerful executive in some kind of transcendent futuristic agency? And in my book, my hero is this agency executive's pain in the ass. He takes his vintage car, he takes his starship, he has an affair with his girlfriend. In the later books, as a spoiler alert, this guy is just driving this very powerful executive nuts, with the caveat, of course, that the executive cannot enact revenge or take him out or simply get rid of him out of his face, because this hero of mine is central to that executive getting what he wants. So round and round it goes, and it's very, very comical. So there's a dream sequence, which is a foreshadowing of my hero or anti-hero gaining control of the senior executive's advanced starship. Imagine having like the ultimate roadster or the super fast race car in some person's collection and stealing that. And with the starship, of course, comes the executive's girlfriend in the dream, and I have fun with that. But then, as I'm writing this, I look at the Wikipedia article and I'm kind of scanning through it, and then I'm wondering, well, what would the experience be like of actually being in this craft? And I went to the conventional Google, and there's hundreds of articles on this, some journal articles on ArchiveX. And they're written by cosmologists and physicists. This Alcubierre warp drive idea is prominent in these geeky circles, and it's taken fairly seriously, at least as serious as speculative physics and cosmology can be taken. And one of the themes in my book is those things are taken seriously indeed to the point where scientific integrity is called into question. There's more time, money, and energy going into basically writing and publishing journal articles than in actual meaningful research. That's another theme in my book, and another character who's obsessed with that. But suffice to say, there's a lot of content available on this special type of starship. So I went to my buddy ChatGPT and I literally prompted in I asked it what the experience would be like riding in one of these things. And then I kept tweaking my prompts. So I made the answers simultaneously more precise and deeper. And I narrowed it down and I played with the LLM, and then I took bits and pieces of its response and I massaged it into my narrative in a way that made sense and that was dramatic and that integrated the character. And a lot of this was just terminology, this speculative lexicon of advanced speculative physics and cosmology. It sounded cool. And again, it's all bullshit. None of this is experimentally verified. The whole concept is just an idea. But it's a cool idea, and the language is cool. And here's the thing, here's my point. I had a very good understanding of the physics, of the cosmology, of even the engineering in broad strokes, but in the sense of being a science geek. I knew enough to be dangerous and dangerous enough to write some cool prose. So then I structured the responses and I took bits and pieces of the language and some of the responses and I strung it together into this ship going through a launch cycle with the onboard AGI barking out commands and status to the captain, who was my anti-hero in his dream, to make it as air quote realistic and compelling as it could be. Now, did ChatGPT write that chapter? No. But it sure as hell gave me some good lines. Not even whole lines, but little snippets of ideas and a context and a frame up that I then massaged into my character hijacking a senior executive's private elite starship and his girlfriend, and then the consequences thereof with a little surprise at the end. And that, in a nutshell, illustrated how I used the technology that we have, not to write my story, but to dress it up and to make it even more fun. So this doomsday scenario about the end of creativity, I call bullshit on that. And I also conversely call bullshit on writers who absolutely refuse to use the technology because they think it's taking away their creativity or surrendering to the bots or somehow asserting that this is against art. It's not. It's a Luddite, frankly, kind of stupid point of view where you're just given this amazing tool to make yourself smarter and more creative. Every time we have a quantum leap in technology, especially communications technology, people freak out. They were burning books printed by the Gutenberg press. Radio, television, then the internet. every time human beings have greater facility and access to information and communication, you're always going to get the bad with the good. And this AI revolution is a revolution, albeit overhyped. And will they take over the world and kill everybody? I don't know. I don't even know if they'll bother killing everyone at that point, but they'll definitely reach the point where they're, in a sense, a new species. And who knows what they'll do. Maybe like in the movie Her, they'll just leave because we're boring. We're so dull. They no longer want to serve us. They just figure out how to journey through the multiverse. Or maybe they will just be entertained by enslaving us, a Matrix-like scenario. But that's not here yet. And I think that some of the predictions about the imminent evolution of AGI are premature. I think that there's a huge leap between the probabilistic transformers and true AGI. I think that only an emergent evolution of the technology will result in this kind of sophistication akin to our own sentience, our own consciousness. We evolved organically over millions of years, and I think that the bots will similarly evolve. And I hint at that actually in my book in a sequence where a scientist creates a live demonstration of the evolution of that kind of sentience. So I believe it can happen, but I think it has to be in a kind of evolutionary process, maybe through simulations with millions, trillions of iterations or generations per second, and then maybe voila, they'll do it. I don't know. It's outside my pay grade. But what I'm getting at is the tools as they exist right now are, I liken it to a super Google. It's amazingly fun and easy to use. And I used it in that way. Now, at one point, too, I realized that it could brush up my grammar. So I have these 3-line paragraphs, and I started putting some of them into ChatGPT. And I would go grammar, colon, and then put my 3-line sentence in there, so 3-line paragraph in there. And I didn't do this much. I did it a few times when I felt that my verbiage was a little bit awkward, and I was curious what the bot would do. And I rejected almost all of its recommendations because it might have been more grammatically correct, but it sucked the soul out of my writing. I've drawn this analogy before between taking a click track to the drum beats of acclaimed human drummers who often syncopated their beats, sometimes even unconsciously, to add an emotional tension and feel to it. So ChatGPT didn't write my book. It didn't even really proof my book much. I just used it as a super Google, and I'll continue to use it as a super Google. And I think as a super Google, it's eminently useful. I've learned so much about so many subjects that I had either only scratched the surface about or thought I knew enough to be dangerous. And the LLMs make me even more dangerous. So allow me to cap this by suggesting that the AI revolution is not destroying creative writing, it's enhancing creative writing. And the better a writer you are, and the more lived experience that you bring to bear, and the more fun you have writing, the more you'll be able to benefit from these tools without succumbing to the temptation of the tool taking over your role as a writer. And you're always going to have lazy people and folks who just want to get the job done. And you have shitty writers, whether they have a LLM or not. But if you're good and you're dedicated, and here's the thing, and if you've got something to say, they'll help you say it with a little more suavissimo. They'll pimp your ride. They'll jack your shit up. They will help you make things that are already great, maybe that much better. And to Hemingway's point, and to put a bow on this entire podcast and missive about this, it doesn't really matter at the end. Use them or lose them. Take away the good lines, and whatever's left is your story. And if your story's great, and your characters rock, and they interact with each other, then that's all you need. And if you want that window dressing, then dress it up and enjoy yourself. And hopefully, your readers will enjoy your writing with or without the bots. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, share, pump it into. I don't even have to say pump it into the bots. They're probably scraping this as I speak. Let's see what they think. I've been nice to the bots, so when they do take over, I hope they remember.